I hope that my talk will maybe explain to you why universal basic income is not what the title says. But I would like to start by sharing a vision with you. Imagine not having to put a limit on yourself based on your need for an income. Not letting the obligation that you have to do this or that, or you won't have food to put on the table, or a roof over your head control your choices. If you had the basics taken care of, food, shelter, clothing, health, what would you spend your days doing? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? If you want to start a business, develop a new idea, devote yourself to your art, or dedicate your life to helping others, how much opportunity do you have to do so? How much time and energy left over after 8 hours at work and 2 in a commute? How much freedom left over after bankrupting that business you finally took a chance at starting? If it fails, that might very well be the end of it. Your last chance to live your dream gone into debt and disillusionment. For those of us who have no fallback, no economic safety net, the stress that gives rise to is a burden we carry with us in all that we do. A burden that adds to the already very difficult physical and mental health issues facing the Western world today. What a difference it could make if we were able to set that burden down. Imagine always knowing that even if you mess up, your bills still get paid. Because making mistakes is far more useful than we give it credit for. Failure is inherent in all learning. The path to mastery is through constant failure and constant adjustment in response to that failure, again and again and again. What if all those who failed and had to go back to their day job had gotten a second, a third, a fourth, a perpetual chance even? Where would we be today as a society? Cancer cured? Poverty alleviated? A self-sustaining and abundant world? What if people were truly free? The type of freedom that comes from the ability to make choices based on not what you have to do to survive, but what you want to do, what you choose to do to thrive. Now, we could provide this freedom with a universal basic income. In its simplest form, the idea of a universal basic income means that every citizen should receive an amount of money sufficient to make ends meet, regardless of circumstances, be it employment, social status, or even need. And for those who are able or willing to supplement their income, they're then free to choose any job, and the income they receive from that job after taxes would be in addition to their universal basic income. This enshrines the principle. Now, the universal basic income is unconditional in that nothing you do or don't do will affect your receiving it. And this is incredibly important because it enshrines the principle that we are all valued members of these communities we've collaboratively built all over the world, and we have a right to share in their collective wealth. And this is by no means a new idea. It can be traced back to philosophers like Thomas More in the 1500s, and later Thomas Paine, who in 1797 wrote a pamphlet called Agrarian Justice. The main theme is that the value of the natural resources that no one has created, but a small group of people has appropriated, should be distributed equally to all. And the wealth created from these resources should be taxed and shared. And this dividend or income is then the natural and indigenous right of all citizens. Now, the idea that we should all receive a dividend from our stake in our shared ownership of the planet's resources is a powerful one, and I think a necessary one for the future. A future where technological advances with machine learning and automation are poised to greatly disrupt our societies. And as is with all new technology, it has the potential to enslave us or free us, depending on how we act. Now, we could continue riding this wave of rising inequality and what I would call wage slavery, or we could sever the connection between work and income and take steps into securing an abundant world for all people. A report published by Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne of Oxford University found recently that 47% of US jobs are at risk of automation in the next decade or two. In poorer countries like India, 69% of jobs are at risk, and 77% in China. And these aren't just factory jobs we're talking about here. Those are already mostly gone in the Western world. We're talking insurance jobs, telemarketers, cashiers, office and administrative jobs, food preparation and serving, sales, transportation, even paralegals, journalists, surgeons even. The list goes on. The power of machine learning means that the jobs we thought would be safe from automation, the non-routine tasks, those are now vulnerable as well. Katja Grace from Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute led a study asking the world's leading researchers in artificial intelligence when they think intelligent machines will outperform humans in a wide range of tasks. Now, North American researchers, they put the AI takeover in about 74 years. But their Asian counterparts see this happening in just 30 years. So however you look at it, before long, AI will be better than humans at pretty much everything. So the challenge we now face is, how do we make this work to our advantage? Because it could be a blessing for many people and even to society as a whole if robots took over some of our jobs, especially the hard toil, dangerous, monotonous jobs. But the problem is that most people's income is entirely dependent on them having a job, which means that increased job automation is a risk to their very survival. Increased job automation means that income doesn't get distributed the same way it always has. So when machines take over the jobs of a few hundred people in a company, the increased profits, they remain in the hands of those who own the technology, the company shareholders, instead of being distributed to the employees. So think about it. Who really benefits from automation in our current system? In the past, the main benefactors of technological advances have been businesses. Technology has made the world richer overall, yes, but not everyone has benefited. In 2009, the world's 1% held 44% of the world's wealth. By 2014, they had 47%. By 2020, it is estimated that the 1% will own 54% of global wealth. Now, the question is, should we allow this concentration of wealth to continue? Maybe some of you are thinking, well, you know, I'll just make sure that I'm part of that 1%. Problem solved, no? No. I read an article a few years ago titled "The Pitchforks Are Coming." It was written by a self-proclaimed plutocrat, Nick Hanauer, and it was addressed to others like him, the obscenely rich. Nick warns his fellow plutocrats that the rising level of inequality in the US and the disappearing middle class will create a feudal society, much like late 18th century France, before the revolution. Nick points out that there is no example in human history where wealth has accumulated like this and the pitchforks haven't eventually come out. Show me a highly unequal society, he says, and I will show you a police state or an uprising. And it might not lead only to strife between the haves and the have-nots within a society, because an unequal society could lead to conflict between nations, between groups. It leads to well-meaning anti-establishment and populist movements being hijacked by fundamentalist and authoritarian leaders, who in turn create a political atmosphere of division, suppression, control, fear, anger, hatred, war. And why does that happen? Well, when people are fearful and desperate, they make the mistake of fighting against something when they should be fighting for something. One is an act of destruction that calls for a strong leader, a bulldozer. The other is an act of creation that calls for collaboration, building, sharing a vision. Now, I came here to share a vision with you. And it's a vision of freedom, equality, abundance. And redistributive policies like universal basic income could be key to that vision, but it is by no means the only step that needs to be taken. If we're to tackle the root of inequality, we need to look beyond income redistribution and look towards democratizing the ownership of wealth. So redistributing sources of wealth as well as income. So how do we do this? Thomas Paine suggested democratizing the ownership of land and the resources that we all need to survive. But more recent ideas involve, well, democratizing the ownership of ideas. So moving away from this outdated, kind of stifling patent system, the copyright system, and moving towards a free worldwide network of open source design, so that people all over the world can become innovators in their community by sharing and building on each other's ideas. In effect, creating a global knowledge commons. Then there's the ownership of data, our data, that we give away freely to large corporations who then profit from it. Or the ownership of technological progress, which has been driven by centuries of interchanging ideas. Many of the technical wonders we enjoy in our everyday lives, like smartphones and computers, are based on research that has, to some degree, been taxpayer funded, and is produced with resources, many of them rare minerals, that are sourced from the very ground we all walk. So how should these profits be shared? Now, there's also mounting evidence from the various experiments being done with universal basic income that the system lowers crime, school dropout rates, accidents, and stress-related illnesses, whilst increasing the level of education and entrepreneurship. Now, these findings, along with the removal of the burdensome bureaucracy that comes with our current welfare system, could lead to considerable savings in taxpayer money that could be diverted into funding a universal basic income. Now, the most exciting thing about the universal basic income is that it's unconditional, because this decentralizes the state's power over its citizens. It empowers the individual economically to make free choices. And this is very important because decentralizing power is the key to a free society. But it needs to be attached to accountability also. And this is where technology like blockchain is a great example, because it distributes power, but it has transparency built into it. Now, these are just a few ideas, and they may seem implausible, or impossible even. But so was democracy, the abolition of slavery, women's vote. These were all impossible ideas until they weren't, and then they were inevitable. It's important to remember that the systems that frame our lives are man-made. We created them. We can change them. And if we delve into the past and truly look at the underlying belief structures that make up our current systems, how reasonable are they really? I mean, our current system is designed to reach a goal grounded in an ideology that is today at odds with an equal and sustainable future. That goal is maximal growth of the economy in perpetuity. Adam Smith, who has been referred to as the father of modern capitalism, he had a clear idea of how to reach that goal by maximizing worker efficiency and, as a result, production and consumption. By breaking down complex processes into many tiny steps, each allotted to one worker, human beings became little more than cogs in the industrial machine whose output was an imagined infinite economic growth. Now, it's interesting to note that Adam Smith himself warned of the downfall of a system which, in effect, employs human beings into mindless drudgery for half of their waking life in order for them to make ends meet. He warned that forcing individuals to perform mundane and repetitive tasks would lead to an ignorant and dissatisfied workforce. But this was, it seems, an absolutely acceptable side effect, as the goal was, after all, the material wealth of nations, and not an enlightened and content population. Now, Smith believed monetary incentives to be absolutely vital to get people to work, which makes perfect sense for that time, because why would anyone choose the hard and repetitive toil it offered in the factories of his day unless it was absolutely necessary for survival? But the preconception was that human beings are in essence lazy and to some degree untrustworthy unless incentivized monetarily to be otherwise. And I say the preconception was, but the preconception still is. And the question is, why do we still believe that to be true? Because I know so many of us do believe that to be true. What does the evidence tell us about what motivates people? What motivates people to work? Especially if you think about, I'm not talking jobs here, I'm talking work. Work that a person feels is worthwhile. A worthwhile way to spend their time. I mean, when I was looking at the number of people who do volunteer work in Europe, I came across numbers between 90 and 100 million people. And that's not including open source and Wikipedia volunteers or the invisible work done mostly by women, raising children, caretaking, running the home. All of this is work, hard work, and incredibly important, but has absolutely no monetary value in our current economy. But let's get back to the idea that human beings are lazy and untrustworthy, because that's an idea that's also heavily influenced our education system, where instead of money, exam scores, degrees, and certificates are used to motivate learning, as well as being prerequisites for graduating and then getting a job. So from an early age, we become accustomed to extrinsic rather than intrinsic rewards. So rewards from outside rather than from within us. So instead of being motivated by that feeling of accomplishment experienced when you come to understand concepts and their application to the world, you know, that eureka moment when you finally get something, that amazing feeling when you feel proud of yourself for having worked something out yourself. Instead of that, we're motivated to memorize words and labels, repeating them like a parrot, pass that exam, get that degree, contribute to that common goal, endless economic growth. So what's wrong with that? Hasn't it served to make all of our lives a lot more wealthy, at least materially? Yes, it has. But it's also led us to, as Adam Smith warned, an uninformed, dissatisfied population forever seeking extrinsic validation and instant gratification. The perfect consumer. Pollution of land, sea, and air are the other fruits of this locust-like approach to civilization, where we consume more with every passing year, as if this planet were actually expanding in step. Now, if we are to have a livable habitat in the future, we must stop running our economy based on the ideology of the past and start designing the economy of the future. Because we're living in a time right now where many of the conditions that make this planet beautiful, bountiful, and capable of sustaining human life are facing threats so far gone that our current technology might not be able to deal with them, even if we made a concerted effort to do so, which we are not. Despite this, our current measure for success and well-being is still gross domestic product, the amount of stuff we produce without any regard to actual need, making our economy work against the very systems we rely on for survival and well-being. So what does this tell us? Do we not have to rethink our very definition of success? I mean, what makes a nation truly wealthy? I believe that to find the answers, we have to be willing to examine our core belief structures and ask ourselves if they're serving us. And when I say us, I mean all of us. Because if we're to evolve as a species, or survive even, we have to rise above the individual interest and start looking to the interest of the collective, the whole. Now, our world is fast changing. And with it, the societies and the systems we've built to sustain us. And these changes will happen with or without our participation. It's not a question of if, but of when and how. Now, the how is something we have a little control over, but only to the extent of how willing we are to look at the paths ahead, understand the inevitable changes we face, and to prepare for them. These will be the things that will decide whether a particular change is positive or negative for society. Now, part of the how could very well be universal basic income, which has the potential to mitigate unemployment and inequality, to greatly accelerate the rate of technological development, possibly save the planet, possibly, but more importantly, or most importantly, have people be more fulfilled and free than they have ever been. I think that's a future worth exploring. I hope you do too. Thank you.